Hello, and welcome to the Responsive Family Sleep Podcast. I'm your host, Kim Hawley, holistic sleep coach, lactation consultant, peaceful parenting educator, and mom. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by all the conflicting sleep info, frustrated with sleep information that just plain felt wrong, or search desperately for a truly gentle and responsive sleep approach, then you are in the right place. In each episode, we'll be answering your most pressing baby and toddler sleep questions, busting those sleep myths, and helping you understand truly developmental, biologically normal baby and toddler sleep, plus encouraging you to trust your intuition along the way. Let's get started. Hello and welcome back. This week, I am really excited about our topic. I have a special guest here, Dr. Karen, and we are going to be talking about gut and digestion and its impacts on sleep. And this is a huge, huge topic. So I am so excited because it's something that I bang my head against a lot with a lot of my clients, and just different challenges. And so I'm really excited for today's conversation. Karen, do you want to just share a little bit about yourself as we get started, and then we'll jump right in?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you for having me here. This is great fun, and I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Yeah.
I am Dr. Karen Molano. I make parenting easy from pregnancy through the first 5 years so that children and their families can tap into that unlimited potential. So that is my goal in life.
Yay! Such an awesome goal. I love it. And you have, when we first connected and I was looking at our website and I was like, oh my God, I love this. You have whole structure, right? 8 pillars. And before we jump into our actual topic of gut health and all of that, and digestion, let's just start off with there because I think there's such wonderful things. They line up so much with the way that I work with families around sleep. So let's maybe just share a little bit about that before we narrow it down.
Yes. So I created a method called the LumiTot Method. And what I did is I took Eastern medicine, functional medicine, and bridged it together with Western and neuroscience to create a parenting structure that really focused on the whole body and literally everything. The idea is that if the brain and the body have the right environment to thrive, we do a lot better. So think of it like a seed and the soil. All of it is going to be important, not just the seed, but the soil you planted in, the weather, who is nurturing this plant, all of it. And a lot of times what happens is that we separate things in general. So when you go to the doctor, your knee hurts, you go to the specialist for the knee, when it turns out that it could be something else going on in your body that nobody's really looking at. So when we can bring it all together, we can really provide that space for the brain and body to thrive and to do what it knows how to do best. So what I did is I created a method that has 8 dimensions of health, so 8 pillars of health. And I'll go over those pillars. The first one that I think is incredibly important is mindset and spirituality. So that's both for the parent, the caregiver, and the child, because you could have all the strategies in the world, and I'm sure you can relate to this, where the strategies aren't working. And a lot of times it has to do more with what's going on within us, in our mindset around it, and our belief system around it. So to me, it's incredibly important that we look at not just our mindset, but the one that we're instilling in our children. So that's one. Then we move on to understanding brain development, because the developing brain of a child is so incredibly different than older kiddos, adults. So we really deep dive into what that looks like. There is definitely a huge expectation gap when we look at little ones. We expect kids to be able to do things that they just simply cannot, because their brain just hasn't gotten there yet. I actually was so mind blown when I found out that our brain doesn't fully finish developing until we're 25 to 30.
I know, isn't that cool? I love that fact too.
It's insane to me, but so many people don't realize that. So imagine when we're expecting our little ones to do things that there's just no way they can do. So that expectation gap is huge. So we look into brain development. Then what most people are more familiar with, which is that social emotional development, that relationship piece, and getting that child to that space, which is what I think most people would relate a psychologist to. And then there is learning and cognitive functioning, which is a whole other realm, which usually learning and readiness for school happens before children even get to school. So that's a really important piece. So you could hit all of those critical factors that come into play in how learning even happens. So that's another important area to really deep dive into. Then I look in nutrition and gut health, which again, we often push aside. We don't realize the impact that nutrition and gut health has on behavior, on mood, not just on our kiddos, but ourselves as well as parents.
Absolutely.
That one's been our big missing piece. Exercise and movement. I feel like people are more and more and more aware of the importance of exercise and movement now, but even more so if we were to connect it to our overall brain health and how we feel and how it impacts our mood. And for your clients, how it impacts sleep. It's really important. And then the environment as a whole. And the environment can consist of so many things. I feel like we could talk about all this for hours.
Forever.
Right? But the environment is another piece that we often neglect. So think about toxins in the environment that can impact our gut health. It can impact our mood. It can impact our development. Being out in nature, being out, getting that vitamin D, even down to what the room looks like where the child resides, because even that can impact mood and can impact sleep. And so, again, these are a lot of factors that we often don't think about that are impacting the overall brain and body. And then the final piece that I bring into this method is stress in general, because stress is seriously one of the number one factors of all of it, whether it's sleep or mood or overall health. Stress is really going to impact all of it. So when we bring it all together, when we look at all these different factors, the idea is that we can create a lifestyle. So it's more of a lifestyle rather than just a method or techniques, that when it makes sense for our families as a whole, when it makes sense to where we're at and it's in alignment with what we believe in, we can implement a lifestyle that really supports the brain and body and really allows a child to thrive, not just from an emotional standpoint, but it can really help reduce the effects of physical illness like cancer and Alzheimer's and all of these things that we hear once we become adults over years and years and years of I'm going to just say abuse that our bodies and our brains get. And so when we start right from the beginning and we can instill this lifestyle, it's going to be a completely different trajectory all in all.
Yeah,
I know that's
and
a lot of info, but
no, it's great because like so much of it overlaps with the way I view sleep, right? The stress, the relational aspects. I mean, looking at things like gut health and nutrition and like, I'm not doing them in the same way that you are, but so it's that holistic view, right? Of bringing all these different pieces together to create the right environment or create the right, I don't know what the word I'm thinking of is, but that there are these different factors and they all are important and interconnect.
Yes. And I love that you bring in that holistic aspect, because I definitely have seen often where, let's say a parent goes in and looks for a sleep trainer, but they're not looking at some of these other things. And so again, you can implement all of these really great skills and techniques, but if something else is missing that we're not looking at, they're not going to be as effective or work as well. And so when you do bring in all these other factors, all of a sudden, it's so much more seamless and there's so much ease and flow. So that's one thing I really love about you, and I endorse 100%, that you do take all of these factors, because then we're just literally hitting ourselves against the wall. I mean, it's not working for me. Like,
I
wow, I
know.
haven't looked at all of these other things that could be really simple tweaks that could make the world of difference.
It's so true. I often say, even when people are coming to me with a specific change they want to make, that we always have to assess the foundational stuff first, right? Because strategies work better when we have the foundational stuff covered, right? That we have assessed all these different factors that are contributing to how a child is sleeping. And, sometimes things are slow and it takes a while to get in and get some things assessed, but at least having them on your radar, because honestly, gentle sleep changes are slow anyway. So, I think we always want, when it comes to sleep strategies and like something I can do right now to change this thing. It's like, well, but we need to back it up and we need to look first, at a lot of other pieces that shape the sleep patterns and the big picture. So,
Yes, absolutely.
yeah. So let's dive into more of our specific topic for today because I'm really excited. I feel like this is an area that's becoming more popular. The idea that like nutrition and gut health affect everything, for lack of a better word, right?
Everything
Um,
is a pretty good word.
yeah, I mean, I personally got into this stuff when we started suspecting that my oldest had ADHD and was neurodiverse, and just looking at that interplay. And then of course, if a little has digestive issues, that's going to impact their sleep. But let's just dive into why is gut health and digestion and all of this important.
Yes, absolutely. Well, first of all, I think it's really important for the listeners, if they don't already know, that there is a brain gut connection. Think of
Mhm.
it as a little secret telephone line where I like to think of it as that phone that the president has in the little presidential suite, right? And they're like, oh, we got a call. We got a call. Like, oh, that phone's ringing. So imagine that phone is literally
I love
ringing
that.
all day long. Okay, this is what's going on down here, what's going on up there. And so the brain and gut work together literally all day long via what is called the vagus nerve. And the
Mhm.
gut is actually completely independent from the brain. So it's our second brain, really. It can function independently, but they constantly work together. So there's a lot of factors that the gut is involved in. But for this particular audience, I think some of the most important is to tap on our mood and how the gut highly influences our mood. So in our gut, we have what we call the microbiome. So it's all, I like to call them our little gut friends. That's how my son remembers and calls them, like, Mom, we got to feed my gut friends.
I love that.
All this like arsenal of superheroes down there ready to fight. So they're in training, they're getting ready to do whatever the body and the brain needs. But there's villains too, right? So we have good bacteria and we have not so great bacteria. Generally speaking, we have more good bacteria than bad. But then all these other factors, again, because this is holistic and everything affects everything else, stress can affect the microbiome. What we're eating affects it, sleep,
Mhm.
movement, all of it. And so all of a sudden, the diversity of all those little superheroes, what happens is they start to shift. And so if we start getting more of the villains in there, now they're in control of what happens. They decide to be in control of, oh, I'm going to get this little kid to start craving more pasta and more sugars and more processed foods because that's what feeds them. So sometimes we
Mhm.
think, oh, I can't get this child to eat a certain thing. But it could very well be that there's an increase of those pathogens, those villain gut friends that are influencing that child's desire for certain foods. And so then the good gut starts to die off and those not so great ones take over. And so, what does that mean? Well, the gut is responsible for creating all of those chemicals that help us to feel good, that help us to have a better night's sleep. So, for example, serotonin is where we get our melatonin from. So, melatonin
Mhm.
helps us to sleep, it helps to regulate our circadian rhythms. And so, if the gut isn't producing that serotonin, now we have less melatonin. So it's definitely going to be a lot more difficult to fall asleep if we don't have enough of the chemicals that help us to even go to sleep. So
Yeah.
that's one example. So that I think that's where it's really important to understand that
I
whatever's happening there goes up to the brain and gives those messages.
Yeah, I love that because I talk a lot about the light input in our production of serotonin and then melatonin. And I think that that gut piece is such another important piece as we think about like our body being able to make the right hormones to actually support mood and circadian rhythm. So I love that.
Yes. And to connect to the light piece, because I love that. I think that's such an important one, especially now that we have so many screens and electronics, is that when you're on a screen, all of a sudden you're not allowing for that melatonin to kick in because of
Hmm.
the light. The eyes are getting fooled. Like, oh, wait, it's not time to go to bed. But let's say we do it all correctly and we get our kiddos off of those electronics within the hour or two before bedtime so that it's not messing with the body's natural ability to start that circadian rhythm function. Okay, great. The lights part is fine, but let's say our body doesn't have enough of that chemical to release the
Hmm.
serotonin. So then again, here's that piece where everything is so interconnected. So I love
Yeah.
that you bring up the piece of the light because it's so important in helping regulate our sleep.
Yeah. I think the thing that's so tricky with babies and gut health is that factors that can influence that aren't always in our control, right? I'm thinking about like how birth goes and how feeding journeys go, right? That there's so many pieces of those that shape gut health, but also that we don't actually have total control over our birth and our feeding journeys. What are your thoughts on things you can do when you know that some of that foundational stuff, isn't as optimal? Like you had to get antibiotics, you had to have a C-section, you weren't able to nurse, like things like that, in an absolute ideal world set you up with the best gut
Mhm.
health. But like we don't live in an ideal world and things happen, they're out of our control.
I do believe, for one, what you're doing here is beautiful because you're bringing so much more awareness to all of these different factors. And
Oh,
so perspective is huge. We can look at this as, oh my goodness, there's no way I can control all these factors, all these things I'm learning. Great, great, great. That's all good. But I have no control over some of these factors. Or you can shift your perspective and think, wow, how great that now I know so much more about some of the things that impact sleep. I can become more curious. I can become to learn more. I can start to learn more about them. And now I can see what is it in my environment that I can shift and that I do have control of because it can be very simple little changes. I don't ever believe in going from 0 to 100 because then we set ourselves up for failures. Like, I'm going
mm-hmm.
to implement this and this and this and this. And then
It's
next thing
too
you know, you're
much.
overwhelmed and you're like, it all failed. But even just little tiny changes. So, for example, if we talk about the brain and gut connection and stress, right? So, stress plays a big factor. And yes, stress happens all the time for all of us. But if we can start to think about, like, okay, well, when I'm under a state of stress, it can be more difficult for the gut to digest my baby's food. So, how can we be a little bit more mindful about eating in a state of alignment where the environment feels a little bit better? So, even just little tiny tweaks, or what kind of foods can I shift to or add in that can really make a difference? Just little things. And I think the idea is to just take one thing that you hear. I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot of things here today that's like, oh my gosh, I don't know, that's a lot. Just take one that resonates. Look into it, become curious about it, and then implement some little thing. Once you have that victory, I promise you're going to be inspired to add another and another.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just this progressive process because I think when things feel out of our control is when we just see it as overwhelming, like, oh, it's too much, I can't do it.
Yeah,
We all can. We
absolutely.
can make little tiny changes every day. And it's a journey, it's a process. It's a process. And to remember that there's always room. And sometimes some things might work better for you, sometimes they don't. It's like, oh, cool. I tried it. I have data. Now I can shift it. Now I can try something different. But again, it's having awareness and curiosity in my perspective as to what do we do when it feels like things are not in our control. Because I think that while a lot isn't, a lot is. So focus on the things that you can control.
I love that. I talk about that a lot with sleep because there are factors outside of our control with sleep, and there are factors in our control with sleep. And especially when you have a really highly sensitive sleeper,
Mhm.
right? We can't change a child's temperament, but there is a lot we can control. And to really to focus on that. So I think that that's such an important message in parenting, just no matter the topic, right? Like there's always going to be stuff out of our control. Focus on what we can control. So I want to get into the whole idea of stress and mealtime, but I'm just wondering before we get into that, what might be, a high level, don't have to go into too much detail, but what might be one thing a parent could do to promote good gut health for a baby or like a younger, toddler that you.
Well, good fats. We could just focus on like a good fat or a little bit of high quality protein. Those are two things we can do. So for example, let's say that your child eats pasta because they tend to eat a lot of pasta, right? Pizza, these kinds of things. One very simple switch that can help to start to promote better gut health is to switch the oils that you're using in your food. So, for example, you can go from vegetable oil to avocado oil or coconut oil or an oil that's actually natural and not man-made because
Mhm.
for example vegetable oil is it's not only bad for the gut but it really influences a lot of inflammation in the body. So that's one quick little tip of something that we can easily do and often don't even notice the difference when we choose just a different oil. The second one is a small amount of high quality protein is really helpful for the gut. And so we'll go back to the pasta situation. Since a lot of our littles like to eat pasta, can we add a little bit of chicken or something where now we're adding a little bit of protein to the meals? And obviously, I'm speaking specific for families that do eat animal protein because some do not, and there's alternatives for that as well. But
Mhm.
those are two key factors where we can just make a little simple switch and now we're starting to support the gut and giving it what it needs for the microbiome to thrive. And the third one I know I feel like would be the ones that can be a little bit more challenging for parents is the fruits and veggies, right? Because the gut really needs fruits and veggies and fiber in order to thrive. So at the minimum, we could always look into a vitamin that can help to supplement and that has some of these fruits and veggies already even added in. But ideally, if we can start to try to incorporate, kids have to have a presentation of a food 8 to 15 times is what research shows before they'll actually start to take it. And oftentimes at like 3, 4 times, like, oh, they don't like it, and we give up as parents.
Mhm.
So if we just keep like, okay, you don't have to force them to eat it because then that's gonna create a negative relationship with that food. But if we could just keep presenting it, put it on the plate. If they don't eat it, that's okay. Present it differently the next time. That's okay. And just keep bringing it in different ways. You'd be surprised how often eventually they're like, hmm, this thing keeps keeping popping up. I'm going to eat it. That's been the case with my little since he was very young. I just keep bringing it up, keep presenting, take a bite. Okay, I'll try it. No, mommy, I don't like it. Okay. And then eventually at some point, like, you know what? This is pretty good. I'm going to start to eat it. And so not to feel like it has to happen. It's just to allow things to happen versus forcing them to happen. So those are three key ingredients for better gut health.
I love that. And that emphasis just on exposure. Exposure and interaction without pressure, can go so far. In my house, we talk a lot about how our taste buds change over time, right? So my kids like to hear about how when I was little, I hated asparagus and now I really like asparagus. Or I don't know. I'm sure there are other examples. That's the one that's coming into my brain, but they love to hear about the foods that I didn't like as a kid and then liked, later in childhood or as an adult, just for stories. They're like, our taste buds change over time. And that's why we should always check in with them and like
Yeah.
try foods that we haven't tried in a while.
Mhm.
Um,
And make them a part of it too, of, oh,
mhm.
fun and interesting. What can we do with it?
Yeah, and like, ooh, the tip of the asparagus tastes different than the bottom part of the asparagus. Like, I still like the really green part of the broccoli better than the stem part of the broccoli, even though broccoli is my favorite vegetable, right? Like that kind of stuff. To just, I don't know, explore
Mhm.
foods in a different way.
And to have fun with it, because I think as parents, we're so hard on ourselves, like, oh my goodness, I'm a failure because I can't get them to eat this veggie or eat this food, or it didn't happen within a certain time frame, or it didn't happen now. But if we could just, again, that back to that mindset, shift our perspective. How can we make this fun? How can we allow instead of force? How can
Mhm.
we find, be okay with not being okay and just allowing the process to happen and bringing it in a way that is fun for the whole family? So I think that's a big one because we are very hard on ourselves, and that plays into how things turn out.
I love that, especially because my kiddos are really different eaters, right? One of them is still to this day a more selective eater, and the other one is much more adventurous and was right from the beginning. And, we put a lot of the same foods in front of them, and they're just different people. And, it's just not creating a lot of pressure around that. Just like, okay, we're going to just keep talking about how it's good to try new things and keep putting foods in the mix, right? So to speak. And just, let it let it let it be, I guess maybe, you know what I mean? Just keep exposing and keep offering
Yeah.
and just I mean, I was kind of a picky eater as a kid. I'm not a picky eater as an adult. So I also I think that's a helpful perspective too, that like some kids just take longer to get a more diverse,
True.
palate.
And then when we start to think about the gut, how much of that's being influenced by our microbiome that we may not be
Hmm.
thinking about? So I think you mentioned a little bit earlier if it was a C-section versus a natural birth, even that alone is going to
Yep.
change what that microbiome looks like because it's completely different bacteria that are starting that process. And so when it's already happened, it's already happened. We can only do something prior when you have the knowledge and understanding. Okay, I'm going to have a C-section birth. So, can I take some of that bacteria from the vaginal area, you literally
Ah,
to
yes.
colonize the gut and to use it and to be able to expose the baby to it instead of the bacteria that's on the hands of the doctors and the hands of the parent? It's going to colonize the gut completely different right from the beginning. And that alone can shift your preference for foods or even the foods you're
Yep.
eating during pregnancy. Totally different. The research shows that the foods that you eat during pregnancy are going to be the foods that your child's going to prefer after birth. So all these little things that we just didn't know before. Like, it's so great to see so much more research around this now. It was just an area that was neglected. So I always think that we're always doing the best that we can with the tools that we have. And the more curious you become, the better. Because you're like, oh, wait, maybe I can do something about this now. So the gut plays such an important role in deciding what foods we even want to eat and don't want to eat.
Yeah. And that it's never like a lost cause. I think that's a good one to keep in mind too, right? Like, yes, if I knew everything I knew now, my oldest was C-section for breech. And so like if I knew what I knew now, that research didn't exist when he was born, or it was still really emerging, right? I would have done things differently. But I didn't know it because it wasn't there. And so like it's never like a lost cause, right? Because we can impact, it's better, it's more ideal if we're starting off with the right foundations in anything. But we can still go back and offer healthy foods, offer whole foods, offer foods that support good gut health. It's not like, oh well, we missed our window of opportunity,
Right.
right?
I think of it as us, like you and me as adults. How
Hmm.
great that the parents listening here can do something about it now when their littles are either babies or 1 or 2 or 3, because I didn't learn about any of those till I was a full grown adult. So my gut was a mess. So it's a lot easier to start even from 2, 3, 4, 5 than it is once you're 20, 30, 40, 50. It's not impossible. It just takes a lot more effort, obviously. And at this point, this is where we are seeing a lot more of the disease in the world, the chronic illness, and all of these things that are plaguing our planet. That if we start as young as possible, the better it's going to be in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. So, stepping sideways, I guess, a bit, let's talk about why it's important to have mealtime be like relaxed and connected versus, food being stressful. Because you alluded to that earlier, and I know we talked about it before we hopped on to record this episode, and I think it's such a lovely point to spend a little bit of time on.
Yes, and I'm so glad you bring up the question because it's one of my favorite topics and one that even as adults, it'll help us as well as parents. The food is digested in a parasympathetic state, so meaning in a relaxed state. This is why when we cook, it's actually really helpful because there's a lot of movement that is meant to relax our bodies and our system. So if you think about it, there's chopping, which is a very repetitive, rhythmic movement. There's stirring, the smells in the kitchen. All of these things are actually preparing for our bodies to digest food in the most optimal state,
I love that.
parasympathetic state. So what happens when we don't have that, which I think a lot of us fall into that, where we're eating under a state of stress. So we're eating in a rush, we're eating upset, we're eating in a state of distress. So when there is any form of distress in the body, what happens is that the gut sends a signal to the brain and brain to the gut. Alert, 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 we're in danger, right? So the first thing to go is digestion. Digestion stops completely so that that energy can go toward whatever the danger is. Even if it's imagined stress, there's still danger because the brain doesn't know the difference between real or imagined. So if you're even eating and thinking about a stressful situation, all of a sudden, the gut's going to stop digesting food. You could have the most beautiful meal, could be everything organic with all the veggies and all the, grass-fed beef and the good fats, and your child could be the best eater at eating all of them. But now let's say that there's an argument at the table or you're struggling or something's not ideal. Now the body stops digesting that food. So what happens if that food is not digested? It sits in your belly. And when it sits in your belly, it starts to create havoc in the body. And that includes problems with sleep. So all of a sudden, now you've got undigested food, now you got gas, now you got bloat, now you got all these yucky things that don't feel great. And your little one is going to have a much harder time sleeping. Mood's going to shift as well. You're going to see more of that anxious, depressed, anger. Those kinds of moods can often happen when food is sitting in your belly undigested. And now the nutrients of all those beautiful, foods that you just put in your body don't get distributed to the body. They don't get turned into the hormones and the neurotransmitters and all the things that the body needs because they're sitting there, once again, undigested. And so that's why it is so incredibly important to find a way to instill an environment where meal times are fun, they're enjoyable, they're relaxing, and most importantly, to slow down. Because even if there's nothing going on in the sense of, let's say, a battle because a child's not eating what they're supposed to be eating, or they're not sitting still, or something's going on where they're fighting back and forth, the child and the parent, even if that's not going on and things are okay, what I notice in a lot of my clients is that we're constantly rushing. We got to get to the next thing, and the next thing, and that includes me. I'm just as guilty, and I always have to stop and remember. Wait, all this food's going to sit undigested in my belly now. So to take a moment to slow down, because when you take a moment to slow down, you do give the body the opportunity to do what it needs to do so that it gives you the fuel you need so that you don't have to rush. So if it's almost like bending time when you slow down, as opposed to, oh no, I got to get it all in because I don't have time. You're actually doing the opposite. Because now you're going to have to deal with more sleepless nights, with more meltdowns, with more of these things that take up time. So if we could just slow down a little bit and really be intentional as to what meal times look like and how can we make them so they are relaxing for both the child and the parents. Again, everything is so symbiotic. All is connected and related one with the other.
I love that because that idea of relaxed, connected, like slow things down around meals is exactly the way we should be heading into sleep times as well for a lot of the same reasons, right? And which makes sense because they both need to be in the same like nervous system state to really happen, and to have good quality sleep. So it's just so like eating and sleep are just meant to be really connected, relaxed experiences that often aren't helped by modern life and that need to be rushing and doing and get to the next thing and overcommit our time, you know.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, as you say that, it makes me think about societal norms and the pressures that we have as parents that often aren't even ours, and we feel like we have to adhere to them. So one of them is the during the dinner table when I observe families, it's like has to be a certain way. You have to sit still. You have to hurry up. You have to eat,
Hmm.
go, take the next bite. Because kids will take a bite and then they'll go, oh, look at that pretty bird over there. And I got this toy over here. And then they'll take a little bit of time and then they'll
Yes.
distracted. And then they'll take another bite. And what I notice as parents, and this is ours and society's, I think, pressure on us, it's like, keep eating, eat. And so now we're creating stress around eating unnecessarily. So what? As long as they eat, if it takes a little bit longer of time, that's okay because now that's going to help their sleep. That's going to help the relationship between the two of you, the relationship with food, all of these little things. And the sitting still is another one that I see often because our body requires to move. We are not meant to constantly sit still.
Hmm.
And that's one that I wish and I hope to see a change on in our society is this need to have to completely sit like statues at the dinner table or when we're waiting or something. Because sometimes kids are just, they just look a little squirmy and but they're not, they're still in their seats, they're still eating, it's just they're squirmy. And we, I think, have been raised to believe that we're all supposed to just sit still or there's something wrong with us. And obviously, we don't want our kids to be looked upon like there's something wrong with them. And so, to really stop and think about some of these, is this really
So true.
necessary? Is this true that that there's something wrong with us if we don't sit completely still during the dinner table or it takes a little bit longer? So, it's just things to think about to shift. If you shift that perspective, is going to help to really have a more relaxed time during meal times.
So true. It's
Yeah,
so
healthy.
true. I want to shift gears because I have one I mean, I have 100 million more things we could talk about, but I one last question area I want to touch on before we wrap up the conversation, and that's around foods that can help promote sleep. And so a lot of times with toddlers, especially preschoolers and up, right, suggest a bedtime snack, especially if we have dinner on the earlier side and then have a couple hours before bedtime, because man, those kids, they really can get hungry and, if they're not nursing overnight or not,
Yeah.
feeding overnight. And so thinking about what foods do you suggest,
Yes.
that help promote
Mhm.
sleep?
I can think of a couple that I think would be helpful. One of my favorites is cherries. Cherries
Mm-hmm.
have so much melatonin in them that they're really great for before bedtime, like maybe even an hour to 2 hours before bedtime.
Mm-hmm.
Bananas are very high in magnesium, so magnesium actually helps us with sleep as well.
Mm-hmm.
Oats are really good as well. I like to, this is a whole other topic, but ideally gluten-free oats are going to be more favorable to the body. And actually, one thing that we may not think about that can also help to induce sleep and aid sleep is chamomile tea. So we don't think about necessarily giving tea to children, but chamomile tea is very safe, it's caffeine free. I would say, the minimum 6 months. And obviously, because we're just talking out to a large audience here, always make sure that it's okay with your pediatrician. So I want to make sure everybody knows that, but chamomile tea is safe if you around 6 months, maybe like an ounce of chamomile tea along with some of these other foods can really help. So if you think about it, you can even make like a smoothie. So banana and a little bit of chamomile tea, and you could buy frozen cherries because I know they're not always in season,
Mhm.
and mix it in with a little bit of almond milk or oats, or you can make a little, if your kids, again, it's going to depend on how your kids eat, but imagine a little bit of oatmeal. And then you add some bananas, you mix in a little bit of cherries. You can even add a little bit of the chamomile tea into the mix. And now you've taken multiple foods that help aid sleep and you've put them together. So you're going to superpower that snack for them. And if that's not possible, even just having a banana or a bowl of cherries, something like that can be really helpful.
I love that. I feel like that bedtime snack with those active toddlers can be so powerful. And just thinking about how to weave in some foods that support sleep better alongside like maybe a few foods that they know and love and kind of introducing new ideas and different ways to get those foods in. So I love that.
And I just want to add, I don't know how many of your listeners have infants, but if you do have infants that are on formula, I would take a close look at those labels because a lot of times there's a lot of sugars and corn syrup in our formulas, and those can definitely impact with sleep as well. And even taking a look at the dairy that's in them, because sometimes our kids can be really sensitive to whether it's cow's milk or some of the ingredients or even the artificial ingredients in there. So it's something else to consider and think about and be curious about when you are feeding a child formula, that you're looking at the ingredients on that formula. And the easiest one I say to target is the sugars and the corn syrup in there, because that'll
Mhm.
impact sleep as well.
Yeah. So many factors, right? Come together and impact sleep. Curious, your thoughts for bedtime snacks as we just wrap up on adding some protein and fat into that snack. So a lot of the foods that you highlighted are not as high in those. And so I'm just curious what your thoughts are. Obviously, we don't want to have something too heavy right before bed, but to kind of balance it out if there are better choices there.
Sure. The proteins can help for sure. These are just foods that are specifically high in those
Yeah. Yeah.
chemicals that are going to help you to sleep. I would just say keep it 1 to 2 hours before bedtime in a small amount if you are going to do protein, like and a high quality protein,
Hmm.
more important than anything. So small amounts, high quality is going to be your best bet if you're going to do a protein, but it can help.
Yeah. I know my kids do better with the protein
Mhm.
fruit combination and pairing that at any time of day. But
Protein
yeah.
is I think we mentioned it earlier, is really important for the gut. So especially for kids, it's often missing in our meals. If you think about breakfast could be a bowl of cereal, lunch could be a bowl of pasta, dinner could be pizza. And then if you take a close look, there was no protein in that entire day. And so to have a little bit of high quality protein doesn't have to be a lot. It's
Hmm.
going to be really efficient for really helping to have that gut have the environment it needs to thrive. So I always recommend it. And again, if you are in a position where you don't eat animal proteins, to look at some of those alternatives that are high protein, or even a smoothie that has all of those amino acids to replace the animal protein.
Hmm.
Because the research is showing that that's one of the three key ingredients in good gut health, and lots of other things for all. That's just one thing we can focus on.
I love that. I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us today. As we kind of wrap up, two things. One, is there do you feel like we touched on so many awesome things? So maybe the answer is no. But is there one thing you feel like we didn't touch on today yet that you feel like we should wrap up our conversation with when it comes to gut health and sleep and
I
our
don't think
littles?
it would be more of a, not anything new, but more of just a reminder that I know we touched on a lot of information, and sometimes you can feel like, oh no, I'm doing it wrong because I'm not doing all these things. And I don't ever want parents to feel that way.
Yes.
shift the perspective. Think of it as how great that I just learned some new information. I can be curious to see what makes sense and aligns and resonates with me, as opposed to going to this blaming and shaming yourself for learning something new. So that's a big one, because often parents feel like they're not doing enough or not good enough, especially when they listen to new information. So it's just a reminder, it's all about perspective, and you are always doing the best you can. And if you're sitting here listening, it's because you actually care and you want to make a difference. So don't forget that.
I love that. It's so true. So, so true. And where can folks find your work? I'll link all the things in the show notes, but where can everyone find you?
Absolutely. So my company is LumiTot, LumiTot, and I'm on socials all under LumiTot. Website is also lumitot.com. And I do have a guide that talks about the 8 pillars and how you can implement really simple tips in each one of those 8 pillars so that you can start to implement that lifestyle that helps to optimize the brain and the body and helps support that environment that we talked about. And that one is gift.lumitot.com, and you can get a copy of that guide.
Yeah, and I'll link that in the show notes as well. Awesome. Thank you so, so much for this conversation and all this great information on the work that you do. I'm so, so thankful that you joined me today.
Thank you. It really has been such a pleasure and an honor to be here. And I am so grateful for what you're doing, because it is super important. Sleep is just so incredibly important on so many levels. And I'm just grateful to see that you are not only helping parents with that, but that you're doing it from a very holistic approach. I highly recommend.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for joining me today. I hope this episode left you feeling more informed, confident, and encouraged on your sleep journey. And just a reminder before you go that nothing in this episode is individualized to your specific sleep situation, nor is it to be taken as medical advice. Take what resonates, ignore what doesn't, and check with your healthcare provider about any medical concerns. Take a moment to subscribe to this podcast so that you'll never miss an episode. And take a moment to rate, review, or share an episode you love on social media. All of that helps parents just like you find me, this podcast, and this gentle and responsive sleep information. I'll see you next time.